So this is a story all about how my beloved rugby team got flipped, turned upside down, and I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you about how I became a supporter of the laughing stock of international rugby. Honestly, how did England go from that to that? How did that happen? 20 years ago, top of the world. 20 years later, equal lowest ever world ranking. And I don't want to take anything away from Fiji. It was an amazing moment at Twickenham, fantastic for them, and I hope they can go on and build on that. But we have to look at what's happened to England. So I'm going to try and do that on this video, which is not going to be fun. It might be fun for you if you're not English, but hopefully it'll be interesting, thought-provoking, start a conversation, get stuck in the comments. Love the comments. They're so good. Thank you. And thanks for the support as well. Been a bit blown away by it, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, because I just started this a few months back, just me. And yeah, it's gone really well. And I'm really looking forward to getting out to the World Cup. Next Tuesday I'm going, and then there'll be content coming for 7 weeks after that. World Cup Central. So hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss any. And that little thumbs up, apparently that helps, I'm told. That helps YouTube algorithms say, tell other people that Tim exists. So if you could do that, that'd be wicked as well. But right, England. Yeah, England won a World Cup. We were on top of the world back in 2003. World at our feet. What happened? Well, this story, I think actually, and I'm not gonna fill in all the gaps. I'm just gonna try and touch on some key points, I think. And one of the big key points was in 1995 when, jumped ahead a picture there. 1995. This was the last ever game of elite professional rugby, the 1995 World Cup final between South Africa and New Zealand. After that, rugby went pro because businessmen like Kerry Packer identified the potential in rugby, and he wanted to set up a world league, 30 franchises around the world. I wonder what that would have looked like if that had actually come off. It didn't. He needed 900 rugby players signed up to this to make it happen. He got to about half that number, at which point the IRB, which is what we called World Rugby then, they got in a room in Paris and said, we've got to do something about this or we're going to lose control. And they signed off rugby going professional. After that, Mike Catt became the first professional rugby player and the European Cup began. There's Roman Untamak's dad, Emile, lifting the trophy the first year for Toulouse. There were yellow cards introduced. Super Rugby became a competition that was established. And then a year later, I think tactical substitutions got brought in. And, you know, there's been various innovations since. But this was the moment. This was the moment where if the RFU had anything about them, they would seize the moment, grab the opportunity to take complete control of rugby in England. And they blew it. Some nations did a better job than others. In the Southern Hemisphere, the big three nations managed to get central contracts for their players because they signed a deal for Super Rugby and superstars like Jonah Lomu being on the telly. They managed to sign a deal with Rupert Murdoch, I think it was, in News Corp. And so, yeah, they could get central contracts. The RFU thought they'd just sit and wait and suss things out. Not like the RFU to botch big decisions. Anyway, they sat back, and that left a vacuum which people like Sir John Hallfield, he was the owner of Newcastle Football Club, and he bought the rugby club as well, signed a load of superstar names. Rob Andrew, a young Johnny Wilkinson was there as well, Dean Ryan and Pat Lamb, Inga Tuigamala. They won the first Premiership title. Other clubs were bought up by private owners. And that moment, I'm not going to say is the cause, but it's one of the most significant causes of where England are today. And I will explain, because what we have now in England is the Premiership, the English Premiership, which is, was a 13-team league. 3 teams went bust last year. The RFU are not responsible for that entirely. They played a role in some areas, and they ballsed up on that as well. But these are private entities owned by individuals. The Premiership Rugby is an organisation which administers the league. Who is Premiership Rugby? Well, funnily enough, they're an organisation which represent the wishes of the owners of the club. So effectively, the clubs mark their own homework. Is it any wonder they don't currently have promotion? They're saying they're going to bring promotion and relegation back, but I'll believe it when I see it. And they've been operating like a cartel for some time, having barely any money for the clubs that do come up that are out of this league, out of the club, and that therefore teams that come up usually go down. Teams that go down usually come straight back up, and the gap has been widening, which only makes it easier for them to say, well, we shouldn't have promotion and relegation. Doesn't help that the RFU have been stripping away all the funding for championship clubs, and even a couple of weeks ago said, yeah, we're not going to bother with a TV deal for the championship, so, look after yourselves, lads. That's where we're at. You can tell I'm starting to get a bit frustrated by that. Feels reminiscent, just going outside of England. This feels a bit like World Rugby, who have their kind of ring-fenced World League that they've planned, which has really upset Georgia, one of the big emerging nations in World Rugby. The reason World Rugby are doing this is because, well, I think partly it's because they're tending to the interests of the big, powerful, financially, the ones with financial clout nations, and they're not thinking about the bigger picture down the line and the emerging nations. And there's a great example of this in Hans-Peter Wild. He's a billionaire, German, loves his rugby, funded the German national team, and then pulled his money because when he spends it at Stade Francais, it actually goes somewhere, might help get them a title. When he spends it on Germany, where's it going to go? Maybe nowhere, because there isn't any vision at the top of World Rugby on where the game's going and how we can arrive at a World Cup in 20 years' time with 15, 20 teams that could all win the World Cup. Germany's a massive emerging potential market, and I think we just shot ourselves in the foot as a sport a little bit. So French rugby is a great example, mind you, talking about Hans-Peter Wild and his team, Stade Francais. French rugby has 4 professional leagues, which has been growing all the time. It was 3 only a couple of years ago. Now it's 4. The top 2 leagues, the top 14 and Pro D2, they have a collectively bargained TV deal. And the way this was achieved was by these big teams, and this map's slightly out of date, but you get the point. These big teams here, the top 14 sides, actually were willing to say, do you know what? We're going to give 1/3 of our money to the league below. And that's literally in the first years, that was literally a case of going, here's some of our money, you have it. And the sort of vision and the sort of attitude that you do not get in English rugby. And the consequence is that Pro D2 is thriving. When teams get relegated from the top 14, they go down to a league which is really good standard, well supported, local authorities willing to invest, private owners willing to invest, because it might mean they go back up again. And as a result, the product's better, the TV viewing is up, and the TV deals that they are collectively signing are much bigger, and all of the clubs are getting more money now than they would have done if they'd done it separately. There is an example for English rugby right there. You shouldn't do exactly the same as France because they're different countries, but the principle is there. Much like with World Rugby, when I think about the World Leagues and carving out the teams like Georgia from their route to the top nations, we need to think about baking a much bigger pie that we can all have a slice of, to stretch the analogy to its breaking point. Also, things like the GIF quota system in France mean that France have had a brilliant generation of young players who've had the opportunity to play in their domestic league, and they're reaping the benefits now. It's one of the reasons why I would quite like it if France won the World Cup, because it would at least be a reward for joined up long-term thinking, which might be an example to England and other nations. Ireland have also done a good job in that sense as well, so I wouldn't begrudge them winning either. And it's a bit like Pete Rozelle. I've talked about him before, the NFL commissioner who one time managed to do the first collectively bargained TV deal, and he only managed to achieve that by getting New York Giants, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh to take less money for their own deals, rip up their own contracts, and hand some of their money effectively to the smaller clubs, because Pete Rozelle managed to sell a vision for something long-term and bigger for everybody. And look at what the NFL has become. Meanwhile, in England, we have a club v country battle which pulls in different directions. This is one of the great fixtures in English rugby, Northampton v Leicester, the East Midlands derby. And what happened the last 2 years? We had the club v country battle, meaning that most of the international players for these two clubs were not available for some of the fixtures involving these two clubs in the Premiership, which is shocking. I also think about the attendance at Twickenham. When I was a kid, I used to go to this game, like the club final match every year. Didn't matter what the teams were. I would always just go. A couple of bus loads from my local rugby club would go to Twickenham. We'd have a great day. Compare that to the top tier at Twickenham being shut for Fiji at the weekend. And in May, the Premiership final, the Premiership Rugby gave away thousands of tickets. They gave them away to NHS key workers, which, yeah, you can say, oh, that's a nice thing to do. But they only gave them away because they could not sell them. It's a big worry because it isn't just attendance. And there are financial pressures on that, but it's the passion for the England team. It's the participation levels at grassroots rugby. And that is the thing. The RFU, as well as running the England team, they run grassroots rugby, and they're demonstrating that they can't do either very well in a number of ways. They've lost a load of money, financial mismanagement, and who were the staff that got cut? A load of community coaches that grow the grassroots game and help grow the participation levels in rugby. Short-term thinking again. The clubs have been losing loads of money, partly because they signed private equity deals with companies like CVC. Again, short-term thinking. Give me a bit of money now, but I'm not really thinking about what that's going to mean in 5 years' time when, hold on, why am I not getting as much money for the TV deal as I was? Oh, because I've signed a big chunk of my ownership away, which is what happened there. You've got the messages that we're sending out in England to potential rugby fans and potential parents of potential kids who might potentially come and play rugby. And the messages that we're sending out are rugby might be a bit racist. Rugby might be have some issue with toxic masculinity and antisocial behaviour. Rugby might be homophobic. Rugby might be sexist. Rugby might be elitist. Rugby might be dangerous. These are the messages we're bombarding people with. Why? Well, there may well be issues that we need to address. And hey, if you show me any sort of discrimination on any one of those things, I will stand with you and fight to get rid of it out of our sport. I don't see it myself, but where it exists, believe me, with you, I will stamp it out. The thing is, it's almost like rugby's apologising for itself, reacting too quickly to people on Twitter or little pressure groups which start up. And rugby just doesn't seem to look after the people that love the sport already and play the sport, or appreciate and recognise and celebrate the reasons why we like rugby. The danger is a massive part of why I play rugby. I love it. As a fellow podcaster, Eddie Stevens, says, the risk is the reward. But we feel a bit ashamed, or certainly the leaders of our sport seem a bit ashamed to say things like that. And I don't understand why, because when you compare it to, go into other things, the way rugby returned after COVID was a shambles. We were one of the last sports back. Some of the things which have been said, Eddie Jones got lambasted for what he said about private schools, but maybe he had a point. I'm jumping through a few points here. The way that the RFU handled the new tackle law height change, just shambolic. Whether you agree or disagree with the law change, I don't agree with the law change at the community game level, the grassroots level. I think there's an argument for it at the elite level, the pros, where there is an increased level of danger because these are massive, much quicker men than they ever were, and they've got the incentive to play for a mortgage, not just play for the love of the sport like the rest of us. But fine, whether you agree with it or not, the way the RFU handled that was a joke as well. And compare it to other sports which are actually thriving at the minute, UFC being a great example. It's booming. And can you think of a more dangerous, risky sport than UFC, MMA? But when these kind of issues flare up, rugby instantly apologises for it, whether it needs to or not. UFC will sit back, and Dana White will, when it's needed to, he'll deal with it. But when he doesn't think it's right, he'll say, ridiculous, and he'll just brush it off. Darts also doesn't apologise for the fact that all of its fans quite like going and having a bit of a drink and dressing up. They lean into it, and as a result, it's become a massively popular sport. And as I say, I just want rugby in England, the RFU, the leaders of the sport, to start being proud of the things that rugby's great for. And here's a message you should be sending to parents. Rugby is a sport where, I tell you what, this would appeal to me with a teenage kid. Get your kid off his computer or her computer, but it largely appeals to boys. Let's agree on that. Get your son out from behind his computer. Get him out in the fresh air. Get him active. Get him channeling all that aggression that he's got, and get him learning a bit of teamwork and respect in the process, learning a new skill, and coming to a really friendly place where he'll meet loads of different people from different backgrounds, and develop himself as a person. That is a message that rugby can and has always spread, but it seems to be a bit shy to say it at the minute. And I don't understand it, but I think it's just symbolic of the issues that are going on in the leadership of rugby generally. It doesn't quite know where it's going or why, And that's what I want it to get back to. Because when I think back to 2003, I think there you had a team which had a bit of vision and identity. Clive Woodward said, right, okay, professionalism's arrived, and he was the first one to really get on it and have a plan, and he embraced professionalism and what that meant and the conditioning and all the rest of it, and reaped the rewards as a result. They had great players too. And when I jump forward to the World Cup final 4 years ago, I think my assessment of that now is the general trend has been steadily down with a couple of little jumps up along the way, but it has been gradually down. I think they did disproportionately well 4 years ago. Now you look at it, I don't think it's that we've suddenly fallen off a cliff. I think that 2019 team did disproportionately well. And I think a big chunk of that is possibly Saracens, just down to that. Because if you think of that one Saracens team who were playing at the top level of European rugby and competing really well with other teams, they were operating on that level. They had about 7 players in that 15: Billy Vunipola, Mako Vunipola, Owen Farrell, Maro Itoje, Owen Farrell, and others, Elliot Daly. Maybe it was just that one team that kind of masked it. And Mark McCall would be the kind of person that I'd be sitting down with a blank bit of paper and going, tell us how we should do it, Mark. Or Rob Baxter from Exeter. But I'll tell you what, someone needs to do something. There needs to be a blank bit of paper. There needs to be some turkey, or maybe all turkeys, voting for Christmas, so we can start again and arrange the sport how it should be arranged, and then not be ashamed of the sport and celebrate it for what makes it great. I don't know whether any of that hangs together, makes sense, but it's just my thoughts on the matter at what is a bit of a watershed moment for England. And I hope I look a bit silly and England go on and win a World Cup. And Ellis Genge with his tweet the other day, knocking people who are not happy with England. Hopefully he proves us wrong and this looks silly, but I fear that will not be the case. What do you think? Give me your comments, hit subscribe, like the video, and I will see you on the next one.